Hey everybody, and welcome to another month in review. So in this series I take a look back at all the games I played during the previous month and I rank them from my least favourite up to my most favourite. Now I have a nice round 10 games to talk about this month and they're all relatively decent. At least there's nothing terrible on the list, and of course the stuff at the upper end of the list is pretty damn good. But before I get started on the games, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer when it comes to purchasing board games here in the UK. And if you use my link in the show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. At number 10, I have Varuna, which is a flip and write style game on the heavier end of the spectrum. And if you remember, a few months back I spoke about a game called Demeter. Now this is almost a sequel to that game with a few more wrinkles to its complexity, but I do say that quite loosely because there's not that much of a difference. But what you're doing in this game is you are flipping a bunch of cards, you're selecting which one you want, which will increase your ability to do something. So you're kind of researching dinosaurs, you're shading them in to try and unlock their abilities, trying to aim towards endgame scoring, bigger multipliers, that kind of thing you've come to expect from a flip and write style game. Now, I think the coolest thing about this game was that sometimes when you choose a card, the cards that you didn't select would end up impacting damage on your ship, which would end up costing you negative points. Or if you took too much damage, you would instantly lose the game. So I thought that was probably the coolest twist on this one, but the rest of it was pretty standard stuff. And once I'd played it, I didn't really feel the need to explore it any further. I felt like I played a lot of games like this one. So despite not being bad at all, it's perfectly fine, it certainly didn't do anything to excite me. So that is Varuna at number 10. At number 9, I have Chamber of Wonders. So this is a recently fulfilled Kickstarter game, and to be honest, it's a very light, almost set collection style game as you're trying to collect these cards. But the way you collect these cards is fairly interesting, I suppose, as you have a variable bunch of buildings on the board where you are playing almost like a worker placement game and activating that mini game. And all those mini games are going to be a different way to dish out or collect these cards. Like for example, one might say, each player collects 3 cards in the hand and then you have a pass and draft style game. One might say, draw cards equal to the number of players and dish them out one at a time, something like Biblios. So it definitely felt like this was cherry picking from a bunch of different games to try and put it all in one conclusive set collection game, I suppose. I definitely thought the game was overproduced for what it was, because this is a very light, simple card game. But it was a full box, or full-size box. There's a physical board, there's these 3D buildings, there's these kind of card slots where you're playing your cards to score at the end of the game. So it's definitely got a lot of superfluous cardboard in the box that probably didn't need to be there. But the game was fine. I must admit, it didn't do anything, again, it didn't do anything to excite me, it did nothing new at all. I suppose the only thing I really did like about it was the fact that every round you were forced to play a card, and at the end of the game, if you ended up collecting too many cards, they would end up costing you negative points. So you want to be making sure you're playing stuff as efficiently as possible. And I also like the fact that I think there's 9 rounds in the game, but you only have 6 slots to play cards into unless you end up spending money to unlock more slots to play stuff into. So I thought that was a nice little twist as well, but I don't think it was enough to differentiate itself or take it above so many other great set collection games out there. At number 8, I have Tags, which is a party word game where you have this grid of marbles, these rather nice marbles, and on each axis you have kind of letters and categories. So some might say, you want a something beginning with T that's in the kitchen. And then basically, if you have an answer for that when it's your turn and you have quite a tight window in which you're trying to give your answers, you're going to grab the marble and put it in your scoring pile. But these marbles come in different qualities, basically. So you have ones that score you more points than others, meaning that you might want to prioritize those categories. That's pretty much the gist of the game. You're trying to beat your opponents in terms of getting the best marbles and try to be as quick as you can by coming up with those words. And I must admit, I do have a couple of games already in my collection that do this. Now, I think this one does it just as well. I think it's quite a nice game. I don't know if it's the best version of it because I have crossed words, which I really like, that I've talked about quite a lot on the channel. This is, again, more of the same, maybe a bit too lavish in its production because it comes in this huge box with loads of these huge marbles and this big stand thing. But it's fine. It does what it does really well. I tend to like word-driven party games, and this is a solid example of that. So that is Tags at number 8. At number 7, I have Amiitis, which is a throwback Euro game based on the Gardens of Babylon, as you're trying to irrigate these tiles and collect them for points. It had this really cool drafting system where you have a bunch of these player powers, or these different characters, which are put in sets of 3, and when you select the first one in those groups, they're going to be free. The second one is going to cost you 1 coin, and the third one is going to cost you 2 coins. And because they're in different groups, you can try and prioritize the things you're trying to do, and you're collecting resources. You are kind of dabbling in a bit of area control to get end-game bonuses or end-of-round bonuses. So lots of traditional Euro stuff here, which obviously I tend to enjoy. Now, my only issue with this game was that it did feel a little bit grindy at times, because collecting resources did take quite a long time, and you couldn't carry too many resources from one round to the next. And you could only ever cash in resources based on the position of this marker on this communal rondel, meaning that if you collected the right resources and then somebody had gone past the action that you wanted to use on that rondel, you had to wait all the way until it went back around again, which could be a little bit tedious. Now, that was my main issue with the game. I thought the rest of it and the actual gameplay itself was rock solid and, you know, really tailored to my personal kind of taste. But those little things made it drag a little bit long for me, and because the game length is quite variable because it is player driven, and the game we had seemed to drag a little bit too long for my personal liking. So yeah, it would have been nicer if it was a bit punchier, a bit quicker, but the gameplay itself was rock solid. But sadly, I think I want a game of this category and this feeling to be a bit quicker than what it actually was, and not to feel so grindy at times. So unfortunately, this one did have huge potential. I still liked it, but it came in at number 7 this month. At number 6, I have Ethnos by Paolo Mori. Now, this game was actually way different than I thought it was going to be in terms of the way it played out, because this is like an area control drafting game as you're collecting these different kind of fantasy characters and then using them to deploy presence on this map. And then, of course, you're just trying to compete for majorities, getting points accordingly. But every time you play these characters from your hand, not only would they let you put presence on the map, they'd also come with a unique ability relating to that particular, you know, fantasy race. Like, for example, you had these bird characters that would let you break rules in terms of being to deploy anywhere. Some of them would let you deploy stronger than you'd actually play, and these kind of things. So, and it also had this really cool twist where, as you draft these characters from a communal pool, when you play a set of characters, or it's kind of like warband, I suppose, anything that didn't relate to the set that you played would go back out into that communal pool, meaning that other players might have quite a cool opportunity to draft the characters that they wanted that came from your hand. So there was a bit of give and take here, and sometimes you'd leave, you know, opportunities for your opponents to take. Actually a really smooth game. There's some good variability here as you play with a different range of these fantasy characters each time you play the game, and they're all quite vastly different, I suppose, and work in different ways. And I was actually quite impressed with how smooth this game worked. It almost felt like a Knizia game to me. So I'm actually quite keen to try some more variations of the characters here, and you know, I was left quite impressed with Ethnos. At number 5, I have Lock, which is another word association party game, and you can play this game either competitively or cooperatively, and you also have 4 different difficulty levels you can select from. So you have a lot of tailorability here depending on what you want the game to be. And all you're trying to do in this game is you're trying to help your teammates guess the word on your card, and the more words they get, the more points you get, and you're also going to get additional points based on the keyword for the round, and also there's a phrase category as well on those cards, which makes it a little bit more difficult to, you know, to give clues out for. But the twist on this game is that each round you play the game, there becomes an event card that comes into play, which will completely change or restrict on what you can do. So for example, some might say, in this round you can only give 1-syllable clues. In this round you can only give 2-word clues. In this round you have to give all your clues out before your teammates can start guessing. And I thought that little twist on this very familiar kind of framework took it above and beyond and made it a bit of an evergreen, really. So this is certainly a game with mass market appeal. You can play this with complete non-gamers, as I've had, and I've had a really good experience doing that with this game. So I thought it's a really nice one, and one that's going to sit on my shelf for a long time to come. So that is Lock at number 5. Okay, so let's get into the top 4 games now, and this is where my commendations will begin. So at number 4, I have District Noir, which is a 2-player only, almost set collection game. A very fast game, only takes around 15 minutes to play, and I love how simple this game works, because all you do is you have a hand of 5 cards each round, and your 2 choices are to either play a card on this communal row, which you're sharing with your opponent, or to pick up the last 5 cards played in that row. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to collect these sets of cards. I think there's 4 different categories, ranging from 5 points each up to 8 points each, and if you have the majority in those categories, you'll score points equal to the value of those cards. But there's also an additional twist on this game where you have these building cards. There's 3 of them in the whole deck, and if you collect all 3 of them, you'll instantly win the game. And you can use that to leverage kind of information against your opponent, because if you have 2 out of the 3 of the cards and your opponent guaranteed needs that final one, you can start playing these negative cards down, which will force your opponent to take negative points in order to stop you winning instantly. So there's some cool mind games and tricks you can play with this one. A very smart and clever game. That is District Noir at number 4. At number 3, I have Assyria, which is certainly a strange and unique game. I can't directly compare this to anything I've played before. This is a game where you are initially drafting these cards to collect resources. The better cards you collect means you're going to go last in turn order, and what you're doing with these resources is you're deploying these huts onto the board to get victory points, to build formations to get even more victory points, but also to deploy them on these rivers to collect these camels, which is a really powerful currency to do strong actions, such as building new temples to give you new spawning points, or to increase your multipliers depending on how many temples you have down. To build new levels to your temples to get more points in terms of income. And you can even kind of donate to these deities, which will give you kind of unique benefits and loads of kind of majority scoring points at the end of the round. There's tons of options you can do here in terms of, paths to victory, I suppose. And I thought this was a really engaging game. I've only played it once so far, but I'm super intrigued to explore it further. It really did capture my imagination. I thought it was a really cool design. And yeah, I love games that feel unique. So yeah, really impressed by this one, and I can see this one really climbing my rankings. So that is Assyria at number 3. At number 2, I have Cilla, which is the 3rd and final Istari gamer on the list. We've already talked about Amiitis, we've already talked about Assyria. This one just about edged Assyria for me. This is such a cool, almost commodity speculation game, as you have this track with these 3 different commodities on it. You're trying to collect these tokens and they'll score points equal to their position on that track at the end of the game. But the way the game flows is so cool, even though it is quite procedural. I love the way you collect these characters that will make you stronger during certain phases in the game. Like for example, some might say during the initial round, these characters will give you the ability to be first player, which is really powerful because it not only does it give you a bonus token, but it means that you, of course, going to beat your opponents to the punch in doing the actions that you want. You're buying these buildings, you're collecting money based on these merchants you collect, and you have this blind bidding system where you're voting to do certain things and get victory points. And I love the way that when you collect these characters, you can either use them for the abilities they're assigned to. As I said, they might give you more money, they might give you more voting power, but if you choose to use them to build with, because they are multi-use cards, you are not going to benefit from the other abilities. So sometimes you might think, I really want to build this building, but if I do that, I'm going to lose this power later, which I could really use as well. It was such a clever game. Grossly underrated. I can't even believe this game isn't talked about. It's so well put together. That is Cilla at number 2. And finally, at number 1, and my favourite game of the month, was Woodcraft. So Woodcraft is a relatively involved dice-driven Euro. It's a contract fulfillment game where your resources are actually dice, but I love the way that you can manipulate these dice to get what you want. Like for example, you might have a 6-value yellow dice and you can carve it in half to make it to 2 3s. You can even cut it again to make it a 1, a 2 and a 3, and you can stick dice together. You can glue pips onto your dice. There's loads of mitigation tools here, and it feels so satisfying when you work out that puzzle in your head to fulfill those contracts as quickly as possible, because the longer you neglect these contracts, the reputation you'll get as a reward will start to depreciate. So it has that kind of thematic tie where you're running a shop, and of course you want to get your customers' orders completed as quickly as possible. I love these characters you can collect to give you unique abilities and income. Just a really cool Euro that I actually found was pretty intuitive in the way that it worked. So, I tend to like dice-driven Euros. I thought this was a very strong example of that, despite me generally being a little bit apprehensive when it comes to contract fulfillment games, because I tend to find them a little bit procedural and a bit monotonous, as in, you know, collect, cash in, collect, cash in. I found that a bit repetitive, but this one really did turn the genre on its head for me, and I really enjoyed my play of it. So hopefully my you know, my feelings towards the game will remain the same for a long time to come. So there we have it. That concludes this month's roundup. I thought this was a really cool range of games here. You know, very simple party games such as Lock and Tags, up to those crunchy Euros such as Woodcraft, and even those throwback Euros such as Cilla, Amiitis, and Assyria. So always good to play a nice range of games. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please be sure to hit like and subscribe to my channel, and check out my other content too. But for everybody else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye-bye.